Hi, I'm Ed Griffin, and I want to tell you about a funny thing that happened on the way to the internet. I opened up my email box the other day and I received an email from a friend who was all upset. He said, "Ed, are you aware that somebody has pirated one of your DVDs that you sell on the Reality Zone? Not only that," he said, "it's all fuzzy, it's not your quality, and they've chopped it up. They've made it very short. It's only about 8 minutes long, and your whole program is about an hour. And they've chopped it all up." And I thought, well, this sounds pretty serious. I better go check it out and see what's going on here. It wasn't that I was concerned about there being a pirated version, because that happens all the time. And frankly, I'm glad for it. If somebody is so fond of one of my programs that they want to pirate it and put it on the internet, that's pretty good. That means we're reaching people that we're not reaching in any other way. I imagine that probably about 50 times more people see our programs on the internet, and we never put it up there ourselves, than those who see it by buying a DVD. So, we're getting the word out, and that's okay. That's good. But this was different. Somebody had taken one of our programs. The quality wasn't good. It was all chopped up, they said. So I looked it up, and it turned out that the program was called Deception Was My Job. And it was an interview that I had done with Yuri Bezmenov. And sure enough, there it was. It was poor quality, all fuzzy, and it was chopped up. Now, first of all, I need to tell you about who this fellow is, this Yuri Bezmenov guy that I interviewed. Yuri was a KGB defector. Quite a guy. I know he came right out of the hardcore Soviet Union in the days when they killed people that tried to defect, especially from the KGB. Well, you'll get the information about him shortly, because I'll show the introduction of him in a moment. But in a word, he was the privileged class. He was a pretty high-ranking KGB officer. But he did defect in 1970, and I interviewed him here in the United States in 1985. The story is pretty astounding. But the important thing here is when I looked at the edit job that this unnamed person did with the video, I was greatly surprised. I thought he had done an excellent job. In other words, he had taken a program that was about an hour long, and he found a certain topic within it and put all the elements together from that topic so that it all went from one to the other. And it really had continuity. The topic that he found was the description by Yuri Bezmenov of the 4 stages of conquest of a nation by communism from within. Now, he was involved in this kind of a strategy. His main job was to receive journalists from the Western world as they came to visit the Soviet Union. They would arrive in Moscow, and Yuri's job was to greet them at the airport and bring them over to the fine hotel and buy them a lot of good food and especially some wine, get them all loosened up. And then his job was to make sure they didn't really see the way it really was. His job was to show them just little show places and staged shows that they put on to make it look like that was the real life there. I digress a bit, but the most interesting part is where they staged a wedding in a church just for journalists. And Yuri says that when the journalists came, they were surprised to see a religious ceremony, a wedding in a church. Why, they were told that religion was persecuted and marriages in a church were forbidden. Well, here's a real wedding. You can see it for yourself. And Yuri laughed. He said they were actors. The bride and the groom got married 3 or 4 times a week. And all the guests that came and drank the champagne and danced, they were all actors. And he was part of that show, putting it together. It was quite an interesting program. But now we're talking about something a little more sinister. We're talking about the 4 stages of conquering a country from within. And he described them as follows. First, demoralization, and he'll describe that. And then destabilization, he'll describe that too. Crisis, you can imagine what that is. And finally, the 4th stage is what they call normalization. Now, that's a cynical expression for military lockdown, martial law and military lockdown, from which there will never be any escape afterward. So he describes them, and the way this unknown person put those sections together, I thought it was brilliant. So I was stunned, though, to realize in looking at this program and looking at those 4 stages of conquest, I was stunned to realize that after all this time, since 1985, here we are, and we are nearing the end of stage number 3 in the United States of America. We're coming, you can see it, we're coming to the end of that stage, what they would call crisis. And how far away the beginning of normalization is, we don't know. But it's a very sobering thing to hear this KGB defector, an expert on conquest from within, describing to us and warning Americans back in 1985, warning that this is something you have to be aware of and something you must never allow to happen in your country. And here we are experiencing it in our daily lives. So I had to get the message out. So we went back to our files and our master tapes, and we got the original recording, and we pretty much paralleled the same kind of an edit that this unknown editor did. Now we have a high quality version. We've added a few little things, but basically it's pretty much the way we saw it. And so I'm going to show that to you now. And so here we are listening to Yuri Bezmenov, who is deceased now. But Yuri Bezmenov will explain with great clarity, great detail, how America right now is being conquered from within. Our conversation is with Mr. Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. Mr. Bezmenov was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect.